There are moments in life when the ground beneath your feet suddenly splits open, as if the familiar world you have always known is collapsing. For Carl Jung, that moment was the day he turned away from his relationship with Sigmund Freud. They had once been intellectual soulmates, so close that people called Jung the spiritual son of Freud. Freud believed that after him, only Jung had the strength to carry the torch of psychoanalysis forward. They exchanged letters, shared secrets, and confided their dreams. Freud gave Jung the kind of affection a father gives to an heir. But beneath the surface, a fracture was growing. Jung began to sense something Freud would not, or could not, face. Freud saw human beings as machines driven by instinct, trauma, and repression. But Jung saw more. He felt there was something alive inside every person. A quiet soul breathing in the hidden spaces of dreams, slipping through fleeting thoughts. A mysterious presence beyond any psychological mechanism. When Jung tried to speak of it, Freud stayed silent. Then he objected. Then he drifted away. Jung realized the relationship could no longer continue. The bond that once seemed unbreakable was finally severed. It was not just the loss of a friendship. For Jung, it was like a spiritual collapse. For years, he had believed Freud was his guiding light, his foundation, the place where he placed his trust and his hopes. When that light went out, Jung found himself drifting in darkness, without a map, without direction. He entered a stage he would later call his confrontation with the unconscious. It sounds beautiful, but the reality was anything but easy. It was a storm so fierce that Jung sometimes believed he was losing his mind. He stopped seeing patients. He stopped social gatherings. He stopped the routines that had once kept him grounded. Each day he walked for hours along Lake Zurich under a dull gray sky, feeling a wild storm rising not outside, but inside his chest. At night, he could not sleep. He wrote in his journals with trembling hands, "I must let myself fall to the very bottom. All I have done so far is skim the surface. Now, I must go into the depths." These were not metaphors. He was actually plunging into the abyss of his own mind. And the abyss began to answer back. Strange images came to him. At first, they were puzzling dreams. Then they became vivid visions. Sometimes he saw Europe drowning in rivers of red blood, a dreadful premonition of the war to come. Sometimes he saw unknown gods, ancient prophets, demons with piercing eyes. Anyone else might have panicked, tried to drown out the visions with alcohol, medicine, or work. But Jung did not. He sat with them. He did not call it madness. He called it a voice from a depth he had never touched before, a depth Freud had turned away from, but Jung could not. At times he saw himself standing at a dark well where a serpent slithered out and whispered to him. He met a blind woman named Salome. An old man with wings appeared, becoming his guide in these inner journeys. They were not hallucinations, as people might call them. For Jung, they were psychic realities. The further he went, the less he felt like a scientist observing a phenomenon. He was a man undergoing an ordeal, an initiation, a death and rebirth into someone entirely new. And from the chaos, a book slowly emerged. Not a dry scientific manuscript, but something like a scripture, a mystical journal. Red pages filled with mandala drawings, Gothic lettering, dialogues with beings only he could see. The book the world would later call the Red Book. At first glance, it looks like a sacred relic hidden in a church vault rather than a work of psychology. But do not be deceived by its beauty. Inside its pages is not comfort but danger. It does not give you answers. It leads you into the dark, into the unknown, into yourself. Jung later admitted, "I had to become sick. I had to go mad. I had to let go of everything I thought I was. Only then could I find something real." Imagine that. A man who had everything, family, reputation, career, a wide-open future, chose to throw it all away to step into a night without a map. Why? Because he saw that the true enemy was not out there, not the world, not other people, but the darkness within himself, the unlived life, the parts he had always avoided, the pieces buried in silence. He saw it, and instead of running, he followed it. Few can do such a thing. Even today, we run from silence, from dreams, from pain. We hide behind glowing screens, behind work, behind numbing distractions. Jung sat still. He let fear break him. He allowed himself to get lost, not to lose himself, but to find a deeper self hidden beneath roles, titles, and expectations. The Red Book is that journey. A map not toward knowledge, but into the abyss. It begins with chaos, with loss, with dissolution. And perhaps if you have ever felt your life cracking open, ever stood in the dark not knowing who you are, then you are standing where Jung once stood. This is not the end. This is the beginning of the descent. Because the deeper you go, the more real you become. Jung chose to enter. He chose the freefall. But no one can prepare for what waits below. It is not an intellectual experiment. It is a battle, an inner battle so fierce that one wrong step could drown the soul. And the visions grew stronger, clearer, more violent. From a whisper in the night, they became living images that froze the blood in his veins. The hazy images soon became a raging waterfall of visions, sweeping away every last sense of safety. Night after night, when Jung closed his eyes, he did not simply dream. He was hurled onto a surreal stage where every detail was too sharp, too real, so real it became impossible to tell illusion from reality. He saw blood flooding across the continent. Green fields turned into red oceans. Human bodies drifting like lifeless corpses. The gray sky suddenly split open, shattering like glass, revealing a thick darkness behind it. All this came years before the First World War erupted, yet Jung felt it in his flesh, in his nerves. That fear was not his alone. It was the fear of an entire humanity waiting to explode. The visions did not stop there. One day, a giant black serpent rose from a deep well, coiling around him, whispering incomprehensible words that echoed through his bones. Another time, a prophet appeared with eyes blazing like fire, reciting verses in an ancient language Jung had never learned yet somehow understood. Then came beings half human, half beast, both threatening and guiding him forward. No one else ever saw these visions. To the outside world, Jung was still the respected scholar, the elegant man in his dark suits. But once the doors closed, he lived inside a parallel universe, every step echoing through an abyss. Many would have called it madness, a breakdown of the mind. But Jung did not try to silence it. He set aside the books and theories that had once been his compass. He picked up a pen and began recording every word, every image, every conversation with these nameless presences. Soon, the white pages were no longer enough. He turned to large folios bound in red leather, filling them with Gothic script, mandalas, and symbolic drawings that looked as if they had been lifted from an ancient scripture. This creation, later known as the Red Book, was unlike anything a scientist had ever produced. It looked less like research and more like a sacred relic, a lost gospel, a medieval manuscript unearthed beneath a cathedral. Its appearance radiated holiness, but its content was something else entirely. It did not comfort. It did not promise answers. It pulled readers into a labyrinth, forcing them to confront what they feared most, themselves. Jung understood this was not a dangerous game he had stumbled into. It was an initiation, a trial his soul was compelled to endure. This was no longer research. It was a rite of passage where the old self had to die so that a new self could be born. At times, Jung found himself speaking with an old man whose wings shone like the feathers of a kingfisher. The man offered no lectures, only short sentences sharp as blades. You think your thoughts are your own. They come from deeper than you imagine. The words made Jung shiver, for they did not sound like knowledge. They felt like forgotten truth, strange yet hauntingly familiar. On another day, a blind woman named Salome appeared. She walked in darkness, yet seemed to see right through him. She spoke only 3 words that stopped his heart. I love you. Love came not from a person of flesh and blood, but from a mythical figure, a symbol of desire and destruction, delivered with a tenderness beyond explanation. And there were times he stood in a ruined temple, surrounded by ghostly laughter. On the altar, a man blindfolded and chained screamed in despair. When Jung asked who he was, the man answered, I am the truth you refuse to see. Each time, Jung wrote and drew, as if his hands no longer belonged to him. The pages filled with colors, symbols, and characters became not a record, but a window into another world. You could call it a descent, a free fall. But Jung knew he was not falling into nothingness. He was being led to a place he was destined to reach, a place impossible to touch without courage. We often believe truth reveals itself in light. For Jung, truth came clothed in blood, in screams, in the destruction of the self. To reach wholeness, he had to pass through his own hell, and he did not turn back. The deeper he went, the more violent the visions became. One night, he saw the entire continent drowned in a sea of blood. Another time, the sun turned into a black coal, falling from the sky, leaving only absolute darkness. He wandered through a barren desert, sand swallowing his feet, wind howling like imprisoned souls, and always, somewhere, a voice whispered, "Go deeper." It was no longer dream, no longer research. It was a battle within, where the enemy was not another person, but the rejected parts of himself buried in the shadows. He knew that if he ran away, he would remain trapped in a half-life. If he faced it, he might fall apart, but he might also, for the first time, truly become himself. So, he chose to stay among the nightmares, to stay with the serpents, the prophets, the ruined temples, the cries from the depths of the unconscious. He let it all pass through him like a pilgrim walking into the dark night of the soul, uncertain of an exit, yet knowing the journey was unavoidable. The price was terrible, the sense of losing his mind, being swallowed whole, torn into pieces. But in return, from that destruction, a book was born. A book not to explain, but to witness the freefall into the depths of the human soul. A book unlike any other, because it did not only tell Jung's story, it illuminated the shadows we all carry within us. And this was only the beginning, for behind the apocalyptic visions, behind the blood, the serpents, and the darkness, a greater truth was waiting. The emergence of the primal shadow within him, the part he had buried all his life. But now, it demanded to be seen. There were nights when Jung lay still in the dark room, the flickering oil lamp casting a trembling shadow of him on the wall, as if he were staring at a stranger. He no longer knew if he was a scientist, a doctor, a husband, or a father. All those roles dissolved when he stepped into the world of active imagination, where the unconscious became a stage and he was only a helpless witness. He would sit down, close his eyes, take a long breath, and let go. What he called active imagination was not some clever technique. It was simply the courage to sit quietly and let the inner voice speak. He did not resist, he did not distort, he did not analyze, he only listened. And once the door opened, the images came rushing in like a flood. One time, he found himself in a foul cave, filled with rotting corpses. The stench of blood and decay choked him. On the stone walls were scattered carvings, remnants of a vanished civilization. A voice rang out, cold as steel. "This is the past you have forgotten. These are the bones of the men you never dared to become." Jung fell to his knees, trembling. He knew this was no illusion. It was a truth he had long avoided. Another time, he stood before a throne of black glass. Around it coiled a giant serpent, its eyes glowing in the dark. The serpent hissed, "You want to rise, but you refuse to fall. You crave the light, but you deny the dark." Jung shuddered. He knew the words were a judgment upon himself. There was no shortcut, no detour. The only path was through. To be whole, he had to let the darkness consume him. To find the self, he had to lose the self. The fear of madness pressed down on him, but Jung kept writing, kept drawing, kept allowing himself to be carried away. Page after page filled with images, serpents, birds, prophets, mocking shadows. And the more he recorded, the more he realized. These were not random chaotic dreams. They were a living system of symbols, the language of the soul. We often run from nightmares, desperate to forget them the moment we wake. But Jung did the opposite. He stayed. He picked up the fragments, wrote them down, pieced them together into a larger picture. And that picture was not only his story. It was a mirror for anyone brave enough to look within. And now I want to ask you something. As you hear this story, have you felt a faint whisper inside, as if you too had once walked through such a cave, glimpsed such a shadow in a dream? If you have, do not stay silent. Leave a trace of yourself, a comment, a word. Show that you too are listening to your soul. Because this story is not only Jung's, it may also be yours. And if it truly resonates, let it spread. With a like, a share, a subscription, as a way of saying, I am here too. I too am on this journey. Back to the visions. They only grew more violent. Jung dreamed of the sun turning into a black coal and falling from the sky. He saw a man stabbing his own heart to free his soul. He walked through a desert of shattered glass, sharp fragments reflecting countless broken faces of himself. And always, in every vision, a voice whispered, "Go deeper." Some nights, he woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, as if returning from a battlefield. Yet, instead of stopping, he sat back down at his desk, opened the Red Book, and kept writing. He knew this was a battle, not against the world, but within himself. There were no allies, no enemies, only him and the forgotten fragments buried in the depths. And in that darkness, something terrifying emerged. He began to see himself with blood on his hands. In one dream, he stood in a field surrounded by the bodies of friends, family, and strangers. In his hand, a sword still dripping red. He did not cry, he did not regret. He felt power, and that sensation horrified him, for it was the part of himself he had repressed all his life. The anger, the violence, the destructive desire, buried under the mask of a polished scholar. For the first time, he saw the shadow, the part he had denied. It did not knock politely. It stormed in, smashed the door, and laughed in his face. Jung woke trembling. He did not know if he was going mad or seeing the truth. But he understood one thing. Until he faced the shadow, he would never be whole. The shadow spoke. It mocked him. "You wear the mask of a saint, but inside, you burn like a starving wolf." Jung was in pain, but he did not deny it. He listened, and as he listened, he began to realize the shadow was not an enemy. It was a part of him, abandoned, forgotten, longing to be acknowledged. In another vision, he entered a ruined temple. On the altar, a man was tied, blindfolded, screaming, "I am the truth you refuse to see." Jung wept. He understood. All his life he had chased the image of being good, a doctor, an intellectual, while ignoring the parts that were alive with rage, desire, and pain. Faced with the shadow, Jung did not try to kill it. He chose to sit with it, to listen. And little by little, the darkness began to change. No longer a monster, but a part of his own flesh. The Red Book recorded every conversation, every image, every moment he was broken and reborn. Inside were demons, murderers, wild beasts, and all of them bore his own face. He began to understand. To become himself, he had to accept it all. In the depths, he uncovered a truth many never want to face. Darkness does not disappear when you deny it. It only grows stronger, hiding in addictions, in destructive relationships, in hidden behaviors. The only way is to bring it back into the circle of life, to make it no longer a stranger, but a part of the self. And in those long nights, Jung realized something profound. In the deepest place, where you think you will break apart, that is where wholeness begins. In the nights that followed, Jung was drawn deeper into dialogues with his own darkness. No longer scattered fragments, but an entire universe unfolding before him, a place he could no longer escape. The shadow grew clearer, more terrifying, and strangely closer. One night, he found himself standing in a barren field. The moon hung above him, cold and heavy like a giant eye. In his hand was a sword dripping with blood. At his feet lay the bodies of friends, colleagues, even loved ones. He stood there, trembling, waiting for regret to crash over him. But it did not. Instead, another feeling rose up: power, strength, the thrill of someone who could destroy everything. He woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding wildly. The truth horrified him. Inside him lived a killer, a wild beast, a primal self that had long been chained. Was he losing his mind? Or was this the very truth he had always denied? The next morning, he sat at his desk and wrote. He did not drive it away. He did not rush to condemn it. He let the shadow speak. And the shadow laughed, its voice crackling like fire. "You have lived as a false saint. You wear the cloak of a healer, but in your chest a wolf is roaring. You crave respect. You long for praise, but you have never been honest. I am that truth." Jung sat silently, his hand trembling over the page. He knew he could turn away, dismiss it all as madness, but another voice whispered inside. "If you ignore this, you will live only half a life. You will wear the mask, be honored, but remain empty." And he chose to listen. The visions grew harsher. He entered a ruined temple, moss covering the stone. At the altar, a blindfolded man, chained and screaming in agony. Jung stepped closer and asked, "Who are you?" The voice thundered, breaking like stone collapsing. I am the truth you refuse to see. Jung fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. In that moment, he realized that all the years of building the image of a good man, a model scholar, a father, a teacher, had been walls of protection. Behind them still lived something raw, furious, and primal, and it demanded recognition. He understood that darkness cannot be killed. If he rejected it, it would return stronger, more toxic, infecting his choices and relationships. But if he opened the door and entered into dialogue, it could become part of the circle of life. In the Red Book, he recorded every conversation with those fierce figures, the murderer, the liar, the beast, and all of them carried his own face. Each time he wrote, he understood more clearly. A person does not become whole by rejecting the shadow, but by accepting it, by integrating it, by letting light and darkness sit together at the same round table. One day, in a vision, he met a demon with massive black wings, eyes burning like hot coals, a crown of bone on its head. The demon laughed when it looked at him. "You call me monster, but I am the part of you that dares to speak truth. You fear me, but without me, you will live in lies forever." Jung did not kneel, nor did he fight. He bowed his head, not in fear, but in respect. For in that haunting laugh, he heard what he needed to know. The darkness was not an enemy. It was the forgotten part of him, longing to return. In the Red Book, Jung wrote, "Darkness is 90% pure gold, for within it lies my truth, my strength, my voice, my freedom, buried and silenced." Read quickly, those words sound terrifying, but for Jung, they were lived experience. Only by sitting with the shadow could he hear the voices long suppressed. The child forced into silence, the man who wanted to scream, the soul longing for freedom even at the cost of destruction. It is no accident that darkness appears in every culture, every myth. Monsters, dragons, demons. They are symbols of the parts of us we deny. Humanity has always wanted to slay them, but the truth is, they are not meant to be killed. They are meant to be ridden. For only when we unite with the darkness can we discover wholeness. Jung did what most people never dare. He sat with his demon. He listened as it spoke of rage, of desire, of abandoned pain. And the more he listened, the more he began to feel a different kind of strength emerging. Not destruction, but integrity. Wholeness is not beautiful. It does not shine. It is fierce, full of contradictions, but it is real. And in that truth, a new door opened. For once Jung passed through the shadow, what awaited him was no longer nightmares. Something larger, something more ancient was approaching. The image of the divine. At first, it appeared as a flickering light in the midst of dreams of blood and ashes. Then, the light grew, filling the entire scene. Jung stood in a vast desert, the sky blazing red like blood, the sun collapsing into a blackened coal. And in the darkness, a sphere of light appeared, so radiant he could not open his eyes. A voice rose from within that light, not gentle, not harsh, simple, but enough to shake his soul. "I am within you, and you tremble before me." Jung understood. His journey had reached a new threshold. It was no longer just the shadow, no longer only the primal forces buried within. It was a direct encounter with the sacred, not a god in the heavens, but a power hidden deep in the human unconscious. From this moment, his journey was no longer merely psychological. It had become a sacred rite. And once the light had appeared, there would be no going back. The light did not lead Jung to peace. It pushed him into a land stranger than the darkness itself. In one dream, he wandered through a crimson desert, the ground blazing like fire, the sky a heavy purple pressing down as if to crush him. He walked aimlessly, each step sinking into the sand. His throat parched until two figures appeared in the distance. An old man with long silver hair, his eyes burning like torches in the night, spoke first. "I am Elijah." Beside him stood a young woman, her eyes covered with a strip of cloth, her steps light but steady, as if she knew the way without seeing. Elijah turned to her and said, "This is Salome." The name startled Jung. In legend, Salome danced before King Herod and demanded the head of John the Baptist, a symbol of desire and destruction, of the fatal danger hidden in the feminine. And yet, here she was, not seductive, not cruel, but a blind woman whose voice was calm and steady. She lifted her face toward him and said, I love you, the words thundered in his mind. Love? From the lips of one who had been seen as the embodiment of cruelty? Love? In this desert drenched in blood? Jung was shaken, and yet his heart trembled. In that moment, he realized she was not the Salome of history or scripture. She was a buried part of himself, the feminine soul he had denied all his life. Jung called it Anima, the feminine spirit within every man. And for women, the counterpart would be Animus, the inner masculine. These were not about gender, but about opposing energies, the missing halves that must unite for a person to be whole. But Jung had lived almost entirely in the masculine. Reason, order, knowledge, discipline. He was the doctor, the scholar, the analyst. He allowed no weakness, no intuition, no dreaminess. The anima was suppressed, silenced, disregarded. Until now, when she stood before him as Salome and said, I love you, Jung did not know how to respond. He resisted, confused. He wanted to analyze, to explain, to understand with the mind. But Salome did not argue. She only existed, radiating unconditional love. I see you, she said. Though I am blind, I see you. The words pierced him. All his life he had been seen through titles and roles. The psychologist, Freud's heir, a master, a husband, but never as a soul, bare and fragile. That is the energy of the anima. Not logic or control, but empathy, presence, and acceptance. Jung understood this meeting was not for comfort. It was to remind him that the soul does not want to be possessed or used for ambition. The soul longs to be loved, to be heard, to be seen, and the anima was the doorway. In the days that followed, Salome appeared again and again in his visions, sometimes as a lover, both near and distant, sometimes as a fragile child, sometimes a serpent sliding across the red sand, sometimes a flickering flame, burning and then extinguished, always changing, always mysterious, always unsettling, because the anima does not come to please. She comes to break, to shatter control, to teach surrender, to teach listening with the heart instead of the mind. And though Jung resisted, he slowly learned to sit with her, not to analyze, not to question, simply to be with Salome, to let her strange love seep into him, even without understanding. From this, a new softness began to grow in him, a softness he had long despised. And just as he was opening to the anima, another figure appeared, carrying an entirely different presence, calm, majestic, wise. It was Philemon. Jung remembered Philemon appearing first in the garden of his home, like an ancient sage stepping out of a tale. He was tall, with flowing white beard and hair, robed in deep blue, his eyes vast like the sky. And behind him spread radiant wings, shimmering blue and green like a kingfisher. Philemon did not seduce, did not threaten. He came as a teacher. His very presence radiated unshakable stillness. In one dialogue, Philemon said, You think your thoughts are yours, but they are not. They come from the soul, from deeper than you imagine. The words struck like lightning. All his life, Jung had believed himself the thinker, the creator, the analyst. Now, he saw, he was only a receiver. Thoughts, feelings, images, they came from a deeper source, from the unconscious, from the collective soul. He was not their master, he was their student. With Salome, Jung learned to surrender and listen with the heart. With Philemon, he learned to listen to wisdom beyond the ego, one feminine, one masculine, one soft, one solemn. Together they entered his life as the missing halves of his being. Philemon taught him strange lessons. Once he said, Your truth is too loud. Be silent, and you will hear. Another time he said, Do not try to become what others want. Become what your soul already is. These were not abstract sayings. For Jung, each one cut into his ego like a blade. They forced him to realize that all his life he had been trying to become somebody, a scholar, an heir, a leader. But the soul never asked for that. The soul only wanted him to become itself. Philemon did not give direct answers. Often he remained silent, forcing Jung to wait, to be patient, to search in stillness. And in that silence, Jung heard his own voice more clearly. Salome and Philemon, two opposites. One blind love and feminine tenderness. One ancient wisdom and masculine authority. They entered his journey together, not to replace the darkness, but to complete it. To show that a human being is not only instinct and fury, but also love and wisdom. Yet neither of them came to bring him peace. They came to prepare him. For once he had learned love from the Anima and wisdom from the teacher, Jung would face the ultimate trial, the complete dissolution of the ego, the death of the old self, so that something greater could be born, and that would be the true turning point. Jung began to realize that his encounters with Salome and Philemon were not simply mystical experiences. They were fragments of a vast picture he had never imagined. They did not come to comfort him. On the contrary, they were preparing him for something far more intense, the complete collapse of the ego. One night he dreamed he was climbing a mountain. The wind howled, the sky pressed down like a giant black dome. At the peak stood a throne carved from white bone, gleaming under the moonlight. A voice thundered, "This is your seat, the seat of the hero." His heart raced. All his life he had been climbing this mountain, through knowledge, through reputation, through recognition. He stepped closer, pride rising in him, but the moment he touched the throne, it turned to ashes and blew away in the wind. Another voice came from behind. "You shall not sit here. You shall not become the hero. You must fall." He dropped to his knees, shaken to the core. Everything he had built, his career, his family, his name, even his spiritual longing, was exposed as illusion. Even the pursuit of enlightenment was unmasked as another disguise of the ego, another performance to prove his worth. In that moment, Jung saw there was no other path but the death of the ego. Not biological death, but the collapse of the old self, the shattering of masks, titles, and illusions of control. He did not resist. He let go, and the letting go cast him into black emptiness. No ground, no sky, no direction, only the void. He called it the state of becoming nothing. For days, even weeks, he felt no clear sense of self. He no longer wrote as before. He sat in silence, swallowed by emptiness. At first, he thought it was madness. But then something strange arose. Peace. Not joy, but a profound stillness. No striving to become, no need to prove. Simply presence. Jung realized a paradox. The ego fears death, yet only in its death can something deeper be born. Only when he stopped clinging to his image did he see that everything was already enough. In his journal he wrote, "I must kill the hero within me. I must become nothing, so that I may see everything." It sounded like a paradox, but it was the secret of transformation. The death of the ego was not an ending, but an opening. Once the ego no longer sat on the throne, something greater, what Jung called the self, could emerge. The visions confirmed this. He saw himself entering a ruined church, the walls broken, the altar shattered, no familiar symbols of religion, no God outside to pray to. Yet in the rubble, he realized the truth. The true temple was not out there. It was within him. A voice whispered, "You seek divinity in the heavens." But divinity has always been within you, not a distant deity, but life and death, creation and destruction, both dwelling together. He shuddered. For so long he had searched for God in books, in symbols, in tradition. Now he saw the sacred was not outside but inside, a force both bright and dark, nurturing and destroying. This realization terrified him. If God was within, then the responsibility was immense. He could no longer hand it over, could no longer blame. Everything was within. And yet, it also brought liberation. For when the ego dissolved, he discovered he was not alone. Something vast and timeless had always been there. It did not need belief. It only needed to be lived. Later, Jung described the experience not as a sweet ascent, but as a painful shedding. The death of the ego felt like being torn apart piece by piece. It left him empty, disoriented, stripped of all anchors. Yet within that emptiness, he discovered freedom. Not freedom to do anything he wanted, but freedom from the need to prove, from the hunger for praise, from the burden of becoming an ideal. He wrote, "Only when you stop striving to become somebody can you hear the whisper of the soul." And in that silence, something new began to emerge. No longer the screams of darkness, no longer the violent visions, no longer the blinding light of gods, only a soft whisper, gentle as water, the voice of the soul. He called this stage the return of the soul. It was not a return to knowledge, nor a return to the external world. It was a return to himself, to the child who had been silenced, to the dreams abandoned, to the parts of him once despised. And he saw that every vision, every nightmare, Every god and shadow had only been guiding him here, to this moment of meeting the soul, simple and painfully true. After the death of the ego, Jung no longer saw the world with old eyes. Every road, every tree, every face carried a new depth, not mere objects, but symbols, reflections of an infinite inner world. But he also knew the journey was not over, for after dying, he now had to learn to live again, not as the old man, but as a new being, rooted in the soul. And it was from here that a new chapter of the Red Book opened. Conversations not with visions of terror, but with the soul itself. No longer loud, no longer overwhelming, only quiet, steady, and unflinchingly true. After the storm of darkness, after the blinding light of the divine and the painful death of the ego, Jung entered a strange new stillness. There were no giant serpents, no shattered thrones, no crimson deserts or seas of blood, only quiet. A quiet so deep that at first he thought he had fallen into meaninglessness. But in the silence a soft voice spoke. "You have abandoned me for too long." Jung started. He looked around and saw no one but himself. Yet the voice continued. "You have built an empire of reason, of knowledge, of outward images. But you have never sat with me. You have never asked how I feel." This time he understood. This was no symbol, no shadow, no god or prophet. This was the soul, the part that had waited for him all his life. He whispered, "My soul, where are you?" And the voice answered, "I have always been here. It was you who turned away." Jung felt his heart tighten. For years he had chased the image of teacher, scholar, pioneer. He had explored the unconscious, analyzed dreams, trained students, but never once had he sat down to truly listen to his own soul. He had faced monsters, gods, and darkness, but he had forgotten the soul. Now, with everything stripped away, the soul could finally speak. Its voice was not angry. It did not scold or threaten. It was sorrowful, gentle, like an old friend returning. "I do not want you to conquer the world. I do not need you to be a great man. I only want you to sit with me. If you abandon me, I will become your pain. But if you hold me, I will become your life." Tears filled Jung's eyes. He realized a simple and painful truth. The soul does not seek glory. It seeks presence. It does not want to be turned into research. It wants to be a conversation. From then on, he began to write differently. No longer violent visions, no longer battles with darkness. Now the red pages filled with dialogues between him and the soul. "What are you?" he asked. "I am the mirror," the soul replied. "If you are honest with me, I will show you yourself. If you deceive, I will reflect that deception back to you as suffering. What do you want from me? Nothing but your presence. You do not need to fix me. You do not need to conquer me. You only need to listen." Each answer was like a needle piercing the armor he had worn for so long. For the soul never flatters. It offers no easy solutions. It speaks raw truths, sometimes cruel. You do not know how to love. You fear joy more than pain. You search for meaning, but have never sat in silence. The words caught in Jung's throat, but he knew they were true. And for the first time, he allowed himself to be wounded without defending. He began to feel again the parts he had abandoned, the sadness of the silenced child, the innocence of the dreams he had dismissed, the fragility he had always hidden. The soul did not lead him to victory. It led him home. Jung called this experience the return of the soul, the true turning point. For everything before, from darkness to divinity, had only been the outer circles. The heart of the journey was the moment he sat down and was honest with the soul. From here, his life changed. Not with grand events, but in the way he was present. He no longer asked, "What do others want me to be?" He asked, "What makes me feel alive?" He no longer chased recognition. He listened for resonance within. He no longer asked, "What should I do?" He asked, "What is true for me right now?" And out of this quiet change, the Red Book was completed. More than 200 pages of Gothic script, mandalas, visions, and sacred dialogue. It was not a work of science. It was a journal of the soul, a book not meant to be understood, but to be lived. Yet Jung knew he could not publish it. Not out of shame, but because it was too real, too dangerous. In the early 20th century, the world worshipped science, reason, and rationality. Who would accept that a famous psychologist sat speaking with his soul, recording dialogues with darkness, divinity, Anima, and his inner teacher? He would be branded mad, arrogant, or heretical. Jung once said, "I know the world is not ready. If I publish, they will call me prophet or madman. Both are wrong." So he locked the book away for the rest of his life. He continued to write, to teach, to publish important works. But the Red Book, the true heart of the journey, lay waiting. Perhaps deep down he was not only protecting himself, he was protecting the book. A work like this, if read wrongly, would be mocked, distorted, turned into entertainment. Jung knew the Red Book was not for consumption. It was a doorway, and only those prepared should walk through. In 2009, 50 years after Jung's death, the book was finally published, and the world was stunned. No longer the pipe-smoking, neatly dressed scientist. Before them stood another Jung, a man who had walked through madness, faced the darkness, spoken with the soul, and returned with a map of transformation. But Jung had never written it for himself. From the beginning, he had called it Liber Novus, the new book. Not his new book, but a new book for anyone with courage. Because in the end, the Red Book is not Jung's biography. It is a mirror. It shows that the path into darkness, through the death of the ego, into dialogue with the soul, is not reserved for a genius. It is for all of us. You do not need grand visions or conversations with demons and gods. Your soul is speaking every day. It speaks through the unease you try to ignore. It speaks through the dream you forget on waking. It speaks through the anxiety you call stress, through the emptiness you label sadness. Each whisper is an invitation, and the only question is, will you sit down and listen? Jung showed us one thing. Wholeness does not come from becoming perfect. It comes from becoming honest. Not light destroying darkness, but light embracing dark. Not the ego triumphant, but the ego dying so the soul can live. That is why the Red Book is never just a book to read. It is a doorway, and the doorway now stands open before you. You can walk past it, keep living as before, keep wearing the mask, keep fleeing the silence. Or, if you are brave, you can step through, and on the other side, you will not find a new person. You will find the real one. Jung wrote, "You are not your name, not your work, not your past. You are the journey you are walking. And that journey, if you choose, can begin right now. Not in Switzerland, not in surreal visions, but in your own small silence. When you stop running and dare to ask your soul, how do you want me to live?" Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.